future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is Monday, January 31st, 2022. We have officially almost at the end of the first month of 2022. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards from across the country. And there's nights like tonight, we're just kind of checking out what's in the news, hearing what's on your mind, telling you what I've been reading, stuff like that. See what you're reading, fun stuff like that. On Fridays, Sean Kitchen and I break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. Although I have to say, this Friday we might have a little bit of a change of format. I mentioned this on the show before, is that Sean is coming to some work conflicts with our regular Friday show. So it looks like on Fridays we're going to be bringing in some guest hosts for a bit. Sean will be joining us when he can. And this Friday, I'm just going to secure this up. Before the person who is going to be joining me on Friday has fully confirmed, let me let this person fully confirm and let me square away all the details before I let you know who will be here on Friday to join me for Out to Coop, Friday's Politics Roundup. But Sean will be jumping in when he can. We'll have more details on that as the scheduling stuff gets worked out. And you got to check out the Wednesday show with Cyril Michaleko. Yes, next Wednesday, Cyril and I are back. That's right. We will be back next Wednesday for the Wednesday show. Cyril, of course, is a progressive columnist for the Bucks County Courier Times and the Intelligencer. And he joins me to drill down into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and international politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress, and you can become a patron for as little as $5 a month. You can also help out the show right now by heading on over to our YouTube channel if you're not already there. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for the show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time we go live. And let everybody know about it, Share it out to your social media, let everybody know what's going on, invite them to the conversation. You can also join our Discord server. Information on that is in tonight's show notes. And we'll be chatting, periodically throughout the week. We had some kind of good discussion, a little bit going on about the show Foundation, which is over on Apple TV or Apple Plus, however you want to say it. Excuse me, I talked a little bit about that. For more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you get your live streams. He's there every night. Head on over to the ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. He's out there at WBAI, KPFK in Los Angeles, all over the country now, man. He's just tearing it up. Phenomenal interviews with some U.S. senators this past week. Dealing with the kind of impasse that we're in about getting absolutely anything passed that's related to democracy, voting rights, and people. About that. And you also got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast, the amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind the podcast Rocky House. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. And for all you gamers out there, check out The Game In. That's with 2 N's. The Game In is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything for Retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops. Great stuff on over there. Kids get also discounts with every A on the report card. Check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at The Game In. That's with 2 N's at The Game In. And got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get? Shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out, as always, goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at @SongADayman. Again, with 2 N's, that's @SongADayman on Twitter. Well, yes. For those of you who have been waiting for the return of our guests, well, yes, this is another week of me chatting, and we're not having a bunch of guests this week again. It's been a little bit of I would say, a rockier start to my my semester, not necessarily in terms of preparation. As a matter of fact, I have to say, at the beginning of this semester, I was so far ahead of the game that I actually kind of took a day off on the weekend leading up to the semester, because I was like, oh, this is great. I can spend some time with my family before I have to go back and all this kind of stuff. The problem was I ran into a bunch of tech issues. I'm teaching 1 online class and 3 in-person classes this semester, and just ran into some tech stuff, some weird ways that the university's content management program interfaces with some websites, and also, I don't know if it's got weird. I'm sorry. This mic is making weird noises in my brains, in my ears. Anyways, so the point is, God, I'm just like, it's been this kind of week, right? Anyways, my point was being is that just some weird stuff, uploading videos and getting things kind of prepared to go live. There was just some problems with uploading videos and the stuff that happens normally, but just seemed to be an excess share. And then, and that was it. My kids, of course, had the Monday off. It was an in-service day, so it made it a short week, and so that was a little bit juggling all that together. So, one of those kinds of things. But we're getting there. We're getting there. So today it's been back to a full week of work and so on. But tonight we've got a bunch of kind of cool stuff going on out there. I'd love to hear from you too as well. Got things that you want to talk about, things that you're jumping the mood. You can throw it in the chat. You got some links to some cool stuff you want to talk about. That'd be great. You can always, if you want to call in, you can always hit the riverside.fm link that is in tonight's show notes. You can call into the show if you so choose. Just remind you that if you do want to call into the show, make sure that you turn the volume down or silence your YouTube channel, so that you're not getting that feedback and you're not getting the delay in the speak. You'll just be calling in directly in riverside.fm. But so tonight we've got some stuff happening in Philly, some kind of cool stuff going on, some great stuff, events coming up around PA elections. There's Trump, of course, gave a basically call for a race war over the weekend, which was just crazy. I got the new issue of Dissent this week. Picked up a couple books from the Doylestown bookstore. It's been a good day. So I just thought maybe we can just take a peek at some of that stuff, see what you got to think, and again, love to hear what's on your mind. Right off the bat, it looks like the Star Wars, the Starbucks unionization effort is not a fluke, as some people suggested that it was just just a little something that was happening up there in Buffalo. And, Buffalo, you had this kind of socialist running for mayor, and she won the nomination, but then you had this all the weird stuff. Maybe just Buffalo. Nope. It turns out that there has been union files, people filing, different workers filing for unionization with the National Labor Relations Board across the country. And of course, this past week, workers at, this was in WHYY that I'm reading from, just so you know, workers at 2 Starbucks locations in Philadelphia announced their plans to unionize on Friday, joining a wave of workers attempting to unionize the national coffee chain shops. Petitions were filed with the National Labor Relations Board on behalf of employees working at the 600 9th Street and the 1945 Callow Hill Street locations, and that was according to the union Starbucks Workers United. The shops in 16 states have now announced or completed union drives. 2 of the first locations that attempted organizing, both in Buffalo and New York, succeeded in winning their union elections. Ahead of those votes, Starbucks CEO Kevin Johnson and former CEO Howard Schultz both made appeals to the workers to reject the union, and some workers received text messages saying, "Please vote and vote no to protect what you love about Starbucks. Low wages, no worker protection, schedules that you can't schedule around, on-time processing," all that stuff. So that's pretty cool. So congratulations for the filing. At least I know that the battle is not over, certainly, but the filing for those workers in Philadelphia, those two Starbucks locations, again, that is 600 9th Street and 1945 Callow Hill Street locations in Philadelphia. So if you were down in Philly at all, stop in and show them some love. And they had a cool action that that if you were kind of pre-ordering a drink in one of those locations and ahead of the different vote to call in to leave your name as union yes or vote yes on the union. That's kind of a pretty kind of cool thing. I think I just might be calling in my name as union yes anytime that I'll stop by a Starbucks. If there's I'm looking at my neck of the woods. I pass two Starbucks on my way to work on every day. One in Quakertown, and right in the kind of the heart of Quakertown on 309. It's right next to like a kind of a sub shop. I forget, Game Inn and Five Guys is all over there. And so there's that one there, and then there's a second one that's in like Briningsville location, I believe. I think it's a Briningsville location on the 222 bypass there. So maybe I'll make it a point to give some Union Yes orders from over there. You know what I'm saying? Pretty cool. So that's the news from Starbucks. This is another thing that just kind of came in today, not too long ago, actually. This was also reporting in WHYY. And Philly is going to pilot a guaranteed income experiment, giving cash to some needy residents. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how this transpires, right? So this kind of breaks into this whole basic income debate, right? So for those of you who might not be familiar with basic income, that's the idea is that you for being alive, just alive, right? Not means tested, other than the fact that you're alive, you get a check, right? A basic income that is no questions asked, right? Just kind of straight up cash income, right? And that goes to everybody. And there's been a number of experiments that have been done on this. There were a couple in the U.S. There was a notable one in Canada, and probably the most. It's not called a basic income, but it is a version of this. The closest thing that would come to this is what you get in Alaska, right? As you know, if you're a resident of Alaska and citizen of Alaska, that you get a check from the oil industry, basically, from the government, but it's basically from the oil profits and the oil drilling and stuff. I mean, obviously that's not a sustainable model, but for the longest time, you lived in Alaska, you just got a check, right? Just for being, a citizen, resident of Alaska. Pretty cool, right? Now, the one in Philadelphia, I would also here. Let me just read you the kind of opening paragraphs on here, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about this. So, cash is king. And again, this is from WHYY. Cash is king. That's the takeaway. As Philadelphia is set to soon join other U.S. cities in attempting an experimental economic mobility pilot that will give recipients cash payments, no string attached. As early as March, Philadelphia will start giving up to 60 people $500 a month for at least 12 months. Recipients will be selected from a pool of 1,100 people who have received federal support through TAMP or Temporary Assistance for Needy Families for 5 years. A total of $322,000 will cover the cost. $1,000, will cover the cost, drawing from existing TAMP funds. The key distinction from traditional social programs such as TAMP, said Dr. Nakia Owens, Philadelphia's Deputy Executive Director of Family Supports and Basic Needs, is that, quote, they don't have to do anything extra for this money. In recent years, universal basic income or guaranteed income programs popular in other parts of the world have gained traction in the United States. Former Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang campaigned on the concept, and Stockton, California has been experimenting with giving some residents monthly cash stipends since 2019. Preliminary findings from that experiment showed recipients' mental health and prospects for finding full-time work improved. The thesis is simple. Traditional welfare programs with stringent eligibility rules do not actually move people out of poverty, but unrestricted cash can. Quote, when you invest directly into the individual, those individuals are more likely to succeed, said Owens. So now this is interesting. I mean, obviously this is the very, very small pilot program. You're talking about $500 a month, right? And it's only 60 people, right? Not even 60 families, but 60 people who are receiving these funds. You could make an argument that, it's more than that, because some of these are going to be, the money will be going to an adult that has children, so have an impact like this. But this is kind of an interesting program. Now, of course, the problem with some of the basic income programs, such as the basic income that were proposed by Andrew Yang, and a lot of, you get this weird support for basic income programs out of Silicon Valley, this huge support for it, thinking this is great, what you should do, you just give people the money. The problem with some of the kind of the right-leaning or the libertarian-leaning versions of basic income is that they just want this kind of like lump cash payment to be put out in place of other social programs. So in other words, that you give this, in this case, it's, $500 a month, and then you get rid of food stamps, you get rid of all the other forms of support, you get rid of any other kind of, supplementary income, free lunches, anything else that the state would normally support, right? Any kind of, support in Medicaid, any of that kind of stuff. That obviously is something that there's no way in hell I could possibly support, right? So but on the left end of things, where you find out that there's support for basic income, that comes out of the idea that you distribute that as your baseline, right? And there's this great book called Give People Money, which kind of looks at some of these experiments. That actually, ironically, one of the biggest experiments where this was carried out was in Kenya. And I forget the dollars amounts, but you talk about a situation where people don't have access to government services in some places. They don't have access to banking accounts and so on. So everything was done through cell phones, where you had this cellular banking system that was kind of a network that was kind of being developed in Kenya, is kind of separate from this program. And the money would just show up in their accounts, right? And what they found is that you had a surprise, surprise, right? If you ask the real question, right, why are people poor? The real reason why people are poor is because they don't have money, right? It's like, that's like in the definition of being poor, right? So instead of psychologizing it and all this kind of stuff, you just use the kind of Occam's razor version of this and say, no, they're poor because they don't have money. Right? Yeah, we could talk about all the reasons why this is, but the reason why they're poor right now is because they don't have money. So why don't we just give people money? And it's been a pretty remarkable success in Kenya thus far. And you're talking about this being in a country that, doesn't have the kind of wealth, the kind of deep wealth that, say, the U.S. has or some other countries. And it's successful. And why? Because they find out that when you actually give people money, they use it for things they need, right? So, and they don't have to go and kind of prove that they're looking for work. They don't have to go and prove that they're upstanding citizens, that they didn't have a glass of wine in the past week, that, and turn over all this kind of private data, and having people inspecting their homes to determine whether or not they're kind of like wholesome individual. No, just give people the money, and you cut out all that bureaucracy, right? You get rid of it entirely. And so you end up saving money in the end, right? Because you're not kind of building out this surveillance network of kind of, say, being on welfare or getting kind of public support. And I've talked about this on the show before, but I can remember growing up on food stamps and a whole series of different kinds of supports after my parents got divorced. And, there was like such shame that was built into the system, because, you have these people who suddenly have access to your lives and are judging you, walking around your house, looking at you. And plus I had, a kind of a mentally disabled sister. And so you had, any assistance for her, you'd have other people coming in to kind of monitor it. And it was never people just showing up for like, hey, can we help you out with this? Can we help you out with this? No, it was more about, it was about judgment. Is like, are you doing these things correctly according to this rubric of what an upstanding person is, right? And And generally these, it was always felt invasive. It always felt shameful. And that is true kind of across the board. But once you remove all that from, and say you don't want the shame police around anymore, that you just want to give people money, is that it works. And it actually turns out that it costs less money in the end, right? Just for that kind of the baseline assistance, right? To make sure that people have got what they need. Now, in order for this to be successful as like at the society level, of course, and this is the argument that you get in a lot of the kind of the on the left end of things. I remember Dissent had a great kind of discussion about this, and the folks writing in Dissent tend to be pretty skeptical of these things, in part because they're being offered as a way of getting rid of social programs. So what I've done effectively, you have basic income, but then you have universal health care, you have universal higher ed, free kind of college tuition for state, for state institutions. You have all this kind of like universal social networks that you get in, kind of other countries, social democratic countries. And then you're basically suddenly you're in a situation where you're investing in human thriving, right? And kind of human kind of development and creativity, as opposed to, just getting people to the point where they can survive. And why is that? Well, if you don't have to worry about your health care, right? If you don't have to worry about your, say your retirement, if you don't have to worry about kind of, getting the education that you need, and you have a robust public housing thing, just like Emily French was just saying this in the chat tonight. Is there a movement to give free housing to unhoused folks? There is some of that stuff, although it's not it's a little bit more kind of scattered, I think. I wanted to say that Seattle was doing something like this, and there was another experiment in another attempt to do this. I know, like Nikhil Saval from Philadelphia is really kind of an advocate to be focusing on housing. Anyways, but the idea is that you have this baseline income, and also imagine this: imagine that instead of working for like a crappy job just so that you could get health insurance or kind of eke out some kind of income, if that you had a little bit of a cushion so that your employer did not have leverage over you, right? So in other words, that, if you were kind of being mistreated at a job, or you were kind of in an abusive, either personal relationship or work relationship, right? Kind of like if your workplace was kind of an abusive situation, you could just leave your job, and you'd still have healthcare, right? Because you got the universal healthcare, but also you actually had kind of some disposable income, so that you're still contributing to kind of the economy and so on. Or let's say, for example, that you wanted to do something like, I don't know, have a podcast and an independent kind of media site, right? And that models where you go out and kind of are reliant upon either advertising dollars or kind of like massive amounts of kind of voluntary contributions in order to make something really sustainable, right? As a livable prospect. As I've talked about on the show before, that's just not possible right now for something like Raging Chicken. However, if you had kind of a baseline income where you could really devote time to kind of building this up from the ground up without having to have the trade-offs about, my putting my family in jeopardy and all this other kinds of stuff. Imagine that. Imagine what it would do for artists, right? There were some cool experiments that took place a while back that was really focusing on giving artists money, right? They did this in the Works Progress Administration as part of the New Deal too as well. They decided that, what happens if we saw artists as part of our economy, right? As opposed to, all these ideologies of the kind of the lone artist, the suffering artist, and all that. What if we actually kind of invested in them and had them kind of like create things, right, for the public good? Imagine that. That's why we had all that art that came out of the WPA. So things like that. So now again, like I said, this is a small pilot project in Philadelphia, 60 people. And there's still some question about how this is going to work out in terms of like where the funds come from. It says it's coming from existing TAMP funds. So is this going to be in lieu of those TAMP support programs and so on? It sounds like it may be. It is going to be kind of quite interesting to see where this goes out. So kudos to those folks in Philly for getting this through. That's pretty awesome. And what else do I got here? Oh yeah, this is kind of cool. I don't know if people read this. I know that my Bucks County folks have probably kind of been checking this out. Chris Ullery in the Bucks County Courier Times published this great piece It's called Analysis. We examined millions of Pennsylvania voter records, and there were few irregularities, in quotes. Let me read a little bit of this. So there has been, this is from the Bucks County Courier Times, there has been a litany of allegations surrounding Pennsylvania's voter rolls over the past year, but a review of registration data suggests most claims may be overblown at best. As a legal battle between a GOP-led Senate committee and the Pennsylvania Department of State continues, this news organization reviewed voter data from December 13th, 2021, as well as in the weeks of November 3rd, 2020 election and the May 18th, 2021 municipal primary to shed light on what has been sometimes vague claims and allusions to voter fraud. The Commonwealth's voter rolls aren't perfect, but election and voting policy experts out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Election Data and Science Lab say the potential errors found in this organization's review don't raise any red flags for them. Among their findings, approximately 12,017 individuals out of 8.72 million voters on the December 13th voter rolls share the same birth date and first and last names. In total, those repeating people accounted for about 24,112 entries, or about 0.28% of the roll. Second, when middle names were included, only 6,537 entries from about 3,262 individuals remained, or about 0.07% of voters overall. So these are duplicate kind of rolls. Like, say, for example, if you register to vote in one location and then you move across the state, you register to vote in another that new location, but you forget to cancel your old one. That is a potential for that, right? But my name is Kevin Mahoney. There used to be another Kevin Mahoney that lived in Percy, right? I know that because I called somewhere and make a reservation when I first moved here, and my wife and I were going to go out for dinner, and then I made a reservation. They're like, Kevin! I'm like, hello? They're like, oh my God, you're back in town. When did you get back? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And we went back and forth and found out there was a Kevin Mahoney that lived here in Percy. So, things like that. So sometimes it can be just a fluke, especially if there's a common name. In other cases, it might be a situation where somebody moved and so on. But still, you're talking about 0.07% of the voters overall. And about 643 voters were over 120 years old, according to their birth date, a rate of about 0.0001% of all voters, right? So again, this is an instance where somebody dies, right? And there's somebody in the family or who's ever dealing with the estate or doesn't think, right, to go in and cancel their voter registration so they stay on the rolls, right? And then about 400 voters were missing last names, 4 were missing a date of birth, and another 86 were missing first names, right? So all in all, there's like some of these minor inaccuracies and everything. Now, let's be clear. This is just looking at the voter records. This is not looking strictly at the people who voted, right? But it's a great piece. I strongly recommend folks check it out. And again, this is done by the Bucks County Courier Times. And I want to let people know that this, let's see, I think it's Wednesday, but it might be Thursday. This Thursday at 6:30 p.m., the League of Women Voters PA is hosting Chris Ullery from the Bucks County Courier Times. It's going to be a Zoom discussion. And just like, I'll put this in the show notes for folks if I can grab it. I'll do that in a second. Let me just see if I can just grab it right away to make sure I don't forget. If I put it in here, let's see. I'll check it out in a bit. I'll put it there in a minute. But so there's a Zoom call. Let me just read it. This is from the League of Women Voters PA. So join the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, the PA Budget and Policy Center, All Voting is Local, and We the People, Pennsylvania, as part of our series of forums on democracy in Pennsylvania for a discussion with Chris Ullery, Government and Development Reporter for Bucks County Intelligencer and Courier Times. He will talk about his latest piece, Analysis. We examined millions of Pennsylvania voters, voter records. There were a few irregularities. He will discuss the data he examined and the findings, what the findings are, and related observations. And so that's kind of cool. I'll make sure I put a link in that before the end of the show. So if people want to check that out, they can. But it will also be in the show notes afterwards. I'm definitely signed up for that. and hope to kind of jump in and hear what Chris has got to say. He's been doing some great reporting over the Bucks County Courier Times, so do check him out. And if you can make it on, I think it's going to be useful just to hearing some of these statistics and getting a little sense of what's real and what's not real. I'm also really hoping that it's going to get a wide swath of people there, just to kind of better understand, what's real and what's not, right? I mean, obviously these kind of, the right wing, I don't know, edge surfers, if you will, those folks are never going to be convinced. But there's a lot of people that just hear about irregularities and they're kind of unsure about it. They're not following politics quite as closely. Sounds like a great opportunity to get some really kind of good, solid data analysis, and it's based upon the piece. It shows you that, look, Pennsylvania's actually got a pretty solid electoral system, and the amount of kind of quote unquote irregularities. Like, first of all, let's be clear about this. As long as we have like humans involved in institutions, right, there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be irregularities, and nothing will ever be perfect. So if we just started at our baseline, that I do not mean to say therefore anything goes, right? I mean, this is the other kind of like crazy move that gets made. I shouldn't use that, but the other kind of like frustrating and disingenuous move that gets made by those folks on the right wing, right, in terms of these arguments. So by me saying like, look, as long as we have human institutions, we're going to have human, kind of error is going to be part of any of those institutions. Right. And then the response comes from the right wing saying, oh, so you're basically saying anything goes then, that just because there's sometimes going to be errors and therefore, that's fine if we have kind of like people cheating on that. No. Can we just like have like a real discussion and say like, no, but let's just say that just because there is an irregularity, like I was just reading some of those examples, right? You have some people that are, have two names that are appearing in the rules that you could check up on. That is going to happen. Just because there's that kind of regularity, and, and this is extraordinarily low percentage, right, of the overall voter rolls, it doesn't mean that therefore it's a conspiracy to kind of take away the elections. No, right? Obviously, if you had a 20% error rate and you had those errors were showing up in terms of actual votes cast, then we might have kind of more of a concern. But here you're just talking about the numbers of people appear on the voting rolls, right? And, in some cases, what Republicans want to do is they say, oh, look, if you've got, what is that piece here? Let's see, where'd that go? So if you've got, say, if you have got 24,112 entries that have people with the same birth date and the same first and last names, right? And that's 0.28% of the rolls. Well, then you should delete them both, right? Okay, you delete them both because what? Because why? Because you're saying that somebody is trying to cheat the system by that, but you don't know this because even that you take that next line down, but when you include middle names, that jumps down from 24,000 down to 6,537 entries, or 0.07% of the rolls. Right, so just think about that. If I went ahead and purged those people from the voter rolls based upon just first and last names and birth date, then I'm basically looking at kind of making an error somewhere like around, I don't know, 17,000, right? About 17,000 people that I've wrongly purged from the rolls, from the rolls. Right, just because my methodology is unsound, and we know that that is going to disproportionately, disenfranchise people that don't need to be disenfranchised. Well, I mean, I'm not saying that very well, but so that that's pretty significant. So, and then those people show up on the day of the vote, and they find out that they're not registered anymore, even though they think they are. Right, so those are certain kinds of things that you'd never want that to happen, right? So, I mean, would it be legitimate to basically, have municipalities follow up with folks and say, hey, you still living at this address, and you just want to make sure to confirm that you're still there, and not at a point right before an election where it can negatively affect the election, but do it kind of like after election to follow that stuff up, or see it as an ongoing process instead of it's something that happens once in a great while, that you just make sure that you're as accurate as possible with the expectation there's going to be some error. Sure. Okay, that's fine. But we all know that these voter suppression efforts or these voter purge rules are not designed to do that. They're designed in order to drive down turnout and to purge people from the rules that are going to be beneficial to have not vote for Republicans, right? So that's the way that works. There's this piece here too. And this kind of folds into a lot of stuff that's been going on that we've been talking about on the show, and I know Cyril has been writing about for a while. But I don't know if you saw, but Trump gave a rally this past weekend. How about that? Deep in the heart of Texas, as it were. And Will Bunch had a great piece on this yesterday. It's titled, "At Texas Rally, Trump All But Promised a Racially Charged Civil War If He's Indicted." And I think, Will he's right on the mark with this. So let me just read you a couple sections from this to give you a sense of kind of what the case is that he's arguing. So this is kind of towards the middle of the piece. So, in fact, the man who occupied the White House little more than 1 year ago delivered one of the most incendiary and most dangerous speeches in America's 246-year history. It included an appeal for all-out mayhem in the streets to thwart the U.S. justice system and prevent Trump from going to jail as the vice tightens from overlapping criminal probes in multiple jurisdictions. And it also featured a stunning campaign promise that Trump would look to abuse the power of the presidency to pardon those involved in the January 6th insurrection. Right? Yes, Amy says, yes, unfortunately he opened his mouth. It says, "It's impossible for me to understate or downplay the importance of this moment, and I hope that my colleagues in the media, who too often over the last year have craved or even pretended about a return to the politics of normal when we are nowhere near normal, they will wake up and they will see this. Of course, Biden's presidency deserves our full scrutiny, with praise for what's gone right, an economic boom, and criticism for what's gone wrong, broken promises on climate and student debt, for example. But while Biden is seeking to restore democratic norms, a shadow ex-president unpunished so far for his role in an attempted coup on January 6th is rebuilding a cult-like movement in the heartland of America, with all the personal grievance and appeals to brown shirt-style violence that marked the lowest moments of the 20th century. On the 89th anniversary of the date, January 30th, 1933, that Adolf Hitler rehabilitated his attempted coup, assumed power in Germany, we are repeating the past mistakes and complacency and underestimation. Are we repeating the past mistakes of complacency and underestimation? It's crazy, 89th anniversary. I had no idea that it was the same date until I was reading this piece. Amid the predictable reiterations of the big lie that Biden's legitimate 2020 election was stolen and his other narcissistic blather, Trump's lengthy speech in Conroe, Texas, contained three elements that marked a dangerous escalation of his post-presidential, post-January 6th rhetoric. Let's digest and analyze each one of them. And I'm just going to kind of name them here. I'll let you read the piece to check it out in here. So for the first time, if somehow elected again in 2024 and upon returning to the White House in January 2025, he dangled pardons before people convicted of crimes in January 6th insurrection on Capitol Hill. Right? And Will Bunch, I think, correctly calls this kind of like obstruction of justice in full public view. So if you think about what that does, is that basically if you got people that are going to trial, right, and they're Trump supporters and they're part of the cult of Trump, Trump is basically saying to them, shut your mouths and support me. Don't kind of spill the beans on me and elect me in 2024 and I'll get you out and you'll prove to be justified. So basically he's trying to persuade folks to not testify against, So that's number one. And number two, right, you can tell, and Bunch is kind of pointing to this, is that, Trump is worried about these different kind of probes, right? He's got criminal probes into his businesses and, his nonprofits and all that kind of stuff. We've seen that. And there's criminal probes on the taxes in New York, but also what we see in the House probe into his involvement with the January 6th insurrection. He said, okay, what happens then? Well, since he's concerned about that, he explicitly called for mob action if charges are lodged in any of these jurisdictions. Said Trump, quote, If these radical, vicious, racist prosecutors do anything wrong or illegal, I hope we are going to have in this country the biggest protests we've ever had in Washington, D.C., in New York, in Atlanta, and elsewhere because our country and our elections are corrupt. Right? He's basically calling people out to the streets. He's basically saying that if they come after me for the crimes that I've committed, you need to unleash holy hell, right, on them. And the crowds were going crazy when he was saying this. And then finally, and this is one that's super important. So, well, let's take a step back and drill down on arguably the most important and alarming word in Trump's statement: racist. At first blush, it seems to come out of left field in the sense that what could be racist about looking into a white man's role in an attempted coup or his crooked financial books? Except that it happens that 3 of the key prosecutors investigating Trump, the Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney, Fani Willis, New York State Attorney General Letitia James, and New Manhattan Prosecutor Alvin Bragg, as well as the chair of the House Committee, Representative Bernie Thompson of Mississippi, are all black. So you see what he's doing? He's using the kind of white victimhood, right, and the call for white aggrievement as a way of saying that this is racist against white people. All that bullshit that we hear all the time about reverse racism and everything he's calling upon. And it says, and Bunch says, in tying skin color to his call for mobs in Atlanta or New York, Trump is seeking to start a race war. No different, really, from Dylan Roof, right? Remember, he's the killer. So there you have it. I mean, it's a great piece. And I obviously did not read the whole thing, but this great piece by Will Bunch at Texas rally. Trump all but promised a racially charged civil war if he's indicted. So there you have that. Emily says, the sad thing is there is no prohibition in the Constitution for a jailed inmate to run for president. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Crazy. So that's the one piece I had. What should I look at next? What was I going to say this one? Yeah, I'll close on an up note. How's that? But not this one, but the one after that. So, I came across, now I'll tell you right now that I reached out to these folks. I should look right now. I reached out to these folks to see if we can get them to come on the show. We shall see if they will come on. There is this article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Now, look, I know that everybody listens to the show is not kind of like involved with higher ed, so I don't mean to kind of go in too narrow of a focus here, but since I am involved in higher ed, and part of that was kind of part of my interest, and I do think higher education is kind of like a critical institution for the maintenance of democracy and so on. I came across this piece by Kevin McClure and Lisa Hicklin Fryer, and it was just published last week, a week and a half ago. It's called The Great Faculty Disengagement. And I haven't exactly been shy about sharing some of my frustrations with, say, working at Kutztown right now, or the state of higher education and so on, and how difficult it's been, just say personally for me, right, just to have something that I cared so much about, just to have my passion for something just killed, and I looked at higher education as an institution, not just in terms of what happens in the classroom. I mean, I still love teaching my classes. I still love, engaging with my students and so on. I've always loved the students at Kutztown. I think they're just, I've just had just awesome experiences with students at Kutztown. And they just always surprise you, always doing kind of working hard and all that kind of stuff. But the administration has just been, has gone out of its way to, kind of just disregard, belittle faculty members, to reduce us to somehow self-interested, like automatons of some sort, like that are only after their own self-interest and they don't care about, higher education and so on. And it gets you after a while, especially when that's coupled with, a refusal for, the administration to fill vacant seats that are for people who have retired or have gotten jobs elsewhere, that we're teaching classes that are necessary for students to get, to have those classes in order to graduate, to strip programs to the bone so that people are just kind of running ragged, all the while heaping more responsibilities to do just bean counting. Basically, this assessment nonsense that they're doing in higher education right now is just like mind numbing. The constant like call for, we say, hey, look, we need a faculty member to be able to cover these courses. And then the reply is like, okay, well, you're going to need to show me all the data. So then suddenly individual faculty members become, like data gatherers for analyzing workload requirements of, students or faculty members in a department in order to cover classes, and so you spend your time trying to figure out how to get access and how to break down all these numbers, as opposed to preparing for your classes where you're supposed to teach. And then when you actually produce these reports for the administration, you basically show them what you're doing. You give them all the data that they want. Not only do they kind of disregard your conclusions, but very often they don't even read it. Like I've told this story before. I never would have suspected this, right? When I was first getting into higher education. Right. But there was an example. We had a class that was called Introduction to College Composition. Right. And we had your first year college composition course. We also had a process by the former chair of our department, the woman who actually was responsible for hiring me, one of the women who was responsible for hiring me, Janice Chernikoff, had done all this research, had traveled across the country looking for best practice. And we set up this, the system was called directed self-placement. And all the kind of best practices in the field of composition rhetoric and writing studies was basically showing that when you involved incoming students into the decision of which course they're going to teach, which writing course they're going to take as part of their composition requirement, that those students more often than not, and I would say at a higher rate than it would simply by using SAT scores or something, were placing themselves in appropriate classes. And as a matter of fact, there were students that we had that English Introduction to College Composition class, which was an elective class, right? You could elect to take Introduction to College Composition before you took the required college composition class, right? If you felt that you needed kind of some additional practice in college level writing and stuff like this, right? That you wanted that. We found that once we started directed self-placement, the numbers in that intro class, before it used to be called something else, developmental English. We changed that too. But before that, the numbers actually went up. So more students were self-selecting for 2 semesters of college level writing. It was crazy, right? I mean, it's exactly the opposite of what the stories you hear about students. Like, students they're not going to want to do any extra work, so they're just going to take the easy way out and just take the one class thing. That's not what we found. And we also found on the other end of the spectrum, there were students who that if you just looked at their SAT scores or their projected GPAs coming out of high school and stuff, it would have put them solidly in kind of like, the standard first year class. But they wanted to take the honors level class. They wanted to do more work. We told them that it was going to be more work. We told them that it was going to be harder, and they wanted the challenge. And those students who made that challenge, we were able to show that they did well, if not better than some of the people who would have been just placed directly into the honors program. Right. So it was this, and we used to have this time in the summer where students would come to this, the campus for orientation. And as part of their orientation, we would take them through these rounds of directed self-placement. Right. It was labor intensive. It was a lot of work. And I was the director of our first year of our writing program, our composition program for several years. And I used to run these things in the summer. It was hard work. It was long days. Lots of kind of reports and all this kind of stuff. But in the end, we had students who were invested in what they were doing in their first year. It was great. And, and Janice, like I said, Janice Chernikoff was responsible for getting this thing off the ground and really kind of laying out a logic. And she published on this stuff, and people would call her to get perspective on how to do it at their university. It was great. And it was like, it really set Kutztown apart, right? It was like we were doing this kind of really innovative program and all this stuff. So long story short is that when you had, the bean counters decided that they were going to start looking at places to cut, they looked at directed self-placement because, you had to pay somebody in the summer to come in and do this. They thought that that was irrelevant work and they wanted to get rid of it. So they looked for ways to get rid of it. And they didn't understand. They used the language that we don't want to give students college level credit for remedial work. They were calling that introduction to college composition class remedial work. It was not a remedial class. We had to stress this to them over and over again. We had to show them the data. We had to show them the research that backed this up. But still, that's all they would call it. So in their head, they put it in this remedial category so that they could get rid of it. Right? And eventually, they did. Right? We went through several years of trying to save this. And then I was, I passed on the coordinator of composition to Dr. Amy Lynch-Biniak, who's still the coordinator of composition there. And she fought for this tooth and nail, kind of left and right. And we also had Amanda Morris, who was our union president at one point and was also, she was running the Writing Center. And the dean, who would become the provost at the time, had basically said, we need data. If you say that this is so important, we need data to show that this class does it what you say. And, and you're not just, giving students, more work or easy way out or whatever it is, right? So I wasn't part of this, but Amanda and kind of led a kind of effort. They did this huge assessment, and they did a kind of like a study of looking at the success rates of students who's self-placed into the 022 class and how they did compared to their peers and all this other kind of stuff. They found in that direct study, because we were told by the administration, well, you're relying upon research, of like best practices and research of faculty that have done this research at other universities. You don't have anything from Kutztown. And we're like, what? Like Kutztown University students are kind of all unicorns that speak some kind of space language so you can't compare it to others. No, that's how research works, right? But they did it anyways. They produced this report, and on the first page, first paragraph, it showed exactly, here it is, this is the results of our finding. It does what we say it does. As a matter of fact, here's all the specifics. We're tracking these students longitudinally and all this kind of stuff. And Amanda goes, I remember we talked about this after this meeting, and went and talked to this guy, Gil, who at that point ran the assessment program and the provost and all this stuff. And they sat down for this big meeting, and it had been like, I don't know, a week or two since they had sent the report over to them. And the meeting was about the report. And the first thing out of their mouths, the administration's mouths, were, I wish I could remember the exact question, was basically something along the lines of like, well, you haven't shown that there is any kind of impact, positive impact over time about this data. And Amanda said, right, what everyone who's at that meeting suggested, Amanda basically said, it's in the first paragraph. And then they kind of like, and looked back down and kind of like fumbled around it. And it was clear to them that the administration never even read the damn report. They were just using their assumptions as a way to get rid of a thing. And they were making all these faculty members, including me, but in that case, it was a bunch of other faculty members, jump through a bunch of hoops to do work that they didn't value. Not that the faculty members didn't value, but the administration didn't even value. But just getting as a way of kind of distracting those faculty members to get them go do something to waste a bunch of their time, even though the administration had already determined they're going to get rid of something. Yeah. Right? So in a context like that, when you're being told, well, the problem is that we don't have data to support that. And then you have faculty members that go and say, okay, we'll get the data. We'll do the data. We'll do it ourselves. We're not going to give you paid for this. We're just going to go up. We're going to do the research. We can get the data. We're going to show you and all that. And you were told that that was the problem. They didn't have the data. So you bring them the data to show them, and it turns out that they didn't really care about the data at all. You go through that for a couple years, then 5 years, then 10 years. I'm going on my 20th year at Kutztown University. And you hit a certain point and you give up. You don't give up on the students. You don't give up on what you're doing in your class. You don't give up on your kind of like required job duties. But I start saying, why the hell am I spending all this time thinking about innovative programs and new things to do when I'm just going to get burnt by it and I'm going to spend all this time and energy and it's going to be wasted? Maybe I should start putting this energy elsewhere. So anyways, I've told versions of that story before, but this article comes out, like I said, by Kevin McClure and Elisa Hicklin-Fryer, called The Great Faculty Disengagement. And there's like just parts in here that I just saw myself so much. And let me just read you these kind of quick sections of this. And it says, basically saying like, look, we have all heard about the Great Resignation, how people were kind of like quitting their jobs left and right, and very often to take other high paying jobs because in the aftermath of COVID and all this other kind of stuff. And they called it the Great Resignation because you had numbers of people quitting were just huge, which is then now forced to some of the kind of lowest wage employers to actually have to lift up their wages, right? But so they're looking at this and they're saying, well, look, faculty aren't exactly quitting their jobs, right? But doesn't mean that there's not a similar dynamic. And it says, nevertheless, most faculty members aren't making big job moves. For them, the Great Resignation looks different. We would describe it as disengagement. They are withdrawing from certain aspects of the job or, on a more emotional level, from the institution itself. Faculty members are not walking away in droves, but they are waving goodbye to the norms and systems that prevailed in the past. They are still teaching their courses, supporting students, and trying to keep up with the basic tasks, but connections to the institution have been frayed. The work is getting done, but there isn't much spark to it. In response to our Twitter thread, they put this out before, this is where the article came from, people said that they were doing what they must, but nothing extra. They said they used to be a rah-rah team player, but not anymore. They used to feel strong ties to their institution, but they have since felt so undervalued that they're cutting back. One response that typically stood out to us, quote, faculty might not be quitting, but they've left the building. Sometimes departure is a state of mind. It's important to note that disengagement doesn't suggest laziness or that faculty members are necessarily shirking their core responsibilities. We know, on a deep personal level, that many faculty members are working very hard. Doing the bare minimum in a global pandemic is sometimes a Herculean, I always can never get that word, Herculean effort. In some ways, disengaging is a perfectly rational response if your employer signals through their words and actions that your engagement isn't welcome. Many faculty members are being asked to do their jobs in a way that puts their safety at risk, and when they raise concerns, they are ignored and invalidated. It's hard to bounce back from that. As we think about the causes of disengagement, there's no denying that institutional management of the pandemic and poor communication are front and center. People responded to our thread with unmistakable fury and a palpable sense of betrayal over how decisions were made and how faculty and staff members have been treated as a result of those decisions. And we've been involved in enough university governance over the years to understand that there's always some slow simmering conflict between faculty and administration. It's inevitable and probably healthy in small doses, but the anger and subsequent turning away from institutions we've observed, this feels more like a rolling boil. And so those are the folks that I decided to invite to see if we can get them on the show. There's another article that's kind of connected to that too as well that came out in November 2021 called Colleges Are Hiring, but do people want to work there? Also written by Kevin McClure, that I'm really interested in talking to them about. So we shall see. So I'm looking at stuff like this. I know I had reached out to some folks that are working on environmental issues, working on climate issues in the state of Pennsylvania. We said we'd kind of get back in the new year, so we're hopefully going to have some folks coming up in the next few weeks on that too as well, looking at climate policy in Pennsylvania, because we're going to have to do something. It seems like everything is pointing in the direction of failure at the federal level. So there. I'm going to save this one for last. So in other news, I'm reading some cool stuff that I thought I'd share with everybody. If you're looking for things to throw on your reading list, there's this one here. It's called The Apocalypse and the End of History, Modern Jihad and the Crisis of Liberalism by Suzanne Schneider. She was interviewed on the Majority Report not too long ago, and the interview just blew me away. So this is from the Inside Jacket cover. So most commentators assume that modern jihad is antithetical to Western liberalism. Historian Suzanne Schneider argues the opposite. The behavior of jihadists has a lot in common with the political life in the United States and Europe. Examining the politics and ideology of the Islamic State, she discovers a microcosm of global political trends, one that can help us understand the slide towards authoritarianism and nihilistic violence apparent worldwide, from the spectacular violence of mass shootings to authoritarian populism and the rise of xenophobic nationalism. She is, what is she? She's Deputy Director and Core Faculty at the Brooklyn Institute of Social Research, specializing in the history and politics of the modern Middle East. Is the interview with on the Majority Report was absolutely fantastic. I'll try to remember to throw it in the show notes. But so I just picked up this book. It's one of the books I ordered at the Doylestown bookstore, and I picked that up today. The second one is this amazing little book. This is called On Compromise, Art, Politics, and the Fate of a American Ideal by Rachel Greenwald Smith. I mentioned her on the show a couple of weeks back. After, again, this is another Majority Report interview. Emma Vigeland interviewed her, and it's absolutely fantastic. And it is right. It's funny because it's dealing with questions of art, and it comes at things from these from a little bit different perspective than I think a lot of folks in the political world start thinking about. But it is at the core of some of the problems that we're facing right now in the current iterations of the Democratic Party, and what we hear about compromise. So let me read you. Here's on the back cover for this is so in On Compromise, Rachel Greenwald Smith argues against viewing compromise as an unalloyed good, politically, ethically, and artistically. By way of such topics as the Riot Girl movement, the Iowa Writers' Workshop, and a COVID-19 pandemic, protests for racial justice, and the resurgence of fascism, she raises the dangers of thinking about compromise as an end rather than a means. Yet even as Smith explores the ways that late capitalism demands individual compromise, she holds out hope for the possibility of lasting change through collective action. Absolutely fantastic interview, and I've started to read this book already, and it's great. And it's right in this. It reminds me of this other book that's related that I'm going to go back to and reread. It's called Against Civility, which is also looking at the ways that civility is deployed particularly against kind of people of color, as a way to, as Martin Luther King famously put in letters to Birmingham jail about the kind of the white liberal or the white moderate. But how that civility is deployed in this way. What Rachel Greenwald Smith discusses is that, we've shifted, and you could see this in the rhetoric of Biden right now about how you're going to reach out to Republicans and have a compromise, and compromise is the mark of good legislation, right? That's the kind of the language that we hear in the mainstream media, where what she's arguing is like, no. That is the exact opposite of the way that we need to be thinking about stuff, right? That is the language of late capitalism. That is not the language of good legislation or something that is measured for the good of the people in a democracy, right? So, when Joe Manchin basically says he's not going to vote for anything unless there's Republicans on it too as well, that is the complete ass-backwards way to thinking about it. It gets us a way of thinking about the impact of policy and has us pay attention solely to the form of democracy. Like, is it bipartisan? As opposed to, is it addressing a real need in the world, and is it going to help out people, right? And so this is where, with the Democratic Party in particular, which is so focused on bipartisanship and compromise, as opposed to having an affirmative agenda for things that are going to do good for people, right? So that's kind of at the core of her book. So I'm going to be getting back to that too as well. So that's a great book. Again, it's called On Compromise, Art, Politics, and the Fate of an American Ideal. Strongly recommended there too as well. So I got one more thing I'll kind of lay out for you before I call it a night, unless there's other things that are on people's mind. My copy of Dissent magazine kind of arrived this week, and I was kind of perusing through it. I just opened it yesterday, and I thought this was an appropriate introduction that I thought I'd kind of close out a little bit here tonight. And this is from Timothy Schenck, who's the co-editor of Dissent, his kind of editor's note at the beginning of the issue is called "Born into the Dark," and it says, what's going to happen. Basically, we're looking at Republicans poised to take over Congress in the midterms, and it looks like it's going to be more and more difficult to get anything kind of meaningful passed. And so, what happens to progressives who give up on progress? And so I'm just going to read this for you here, and this is from the Inside Jacket again. The problem isn't just about the frustrations of the last year. Yes, the headlines have turned to an eerie replay of the 1970s, inflation, rising crime rates, Afghanistan as the new Vietnam. But the day-to-day setbacks are part of a distinctive set of concerns that have been gathering strength over the last decade. There's the dwindling faith that millennials and Zoomers will claw their way back to the economic security so many of their parents took for granted, along with the fraying of meaningful human relationships in the age of social media and maybe reoccurring lockdowns. Plus the constant ticking of a doomsday clock as the planet heats up little by little. It adds up to the deepening conviction that progress itself is an illusion, that history is always ready to undo any temporary advances over humanity's natural state, where the strong do what they can and the weak do what they must. In the face of all that, we have a caretaker presidency as a bridge to what exactly? For now, it seems like a Harris-Buttigieg ticket or some other human counterpart to an "in this house we believe" sign. No wonder progressives aren't exactly chipper these days, for which I suggest readers of Dissent should be grateful. Whatever. We're a tribe united by our recognition that pessimism of the intellect is the starting point for serious politics. Liberals have merely adopted the dark. But democratic socialism was born into it, born out of the realization that history wasn't going to deliver a ready-made working-class majority to our side. Born out of the belief that collective action could nevertheless inch us toward a more just world. We know how it feels to lose faith in the inevitability of progress. But we also know you get something better in return. Hope for real democracy. So, I don't know about you, but that seems kind of like an appropriate way to close out for the night. Kind of got a real mix of some kind of cool things going on, some, again, uptick of unionization efforts, looking at attempts to bring in some kind of basic income experiments into Philadelphia, and, and the usual kind of dark cloud that I so often bring to these airways. So anyways, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I appreciate the time. I appreciate you stopping by, and I appreciate you sharing out the information to your friends, to your family members, to your colleagues, letting them know about the show, getting them involved. Is fantastic. This Wednesday, we will not have a show for this Wednesday, but next Wednesday, Cyril Mikaleko will be back for the Wednesday show. We're going to basically take a look. He's got a couple great articles out. He's got another gig that is going to be bringing more of his voice to Bucks County, which I'm not sure if he's disclosed it all online yet, so I'll let him do that. But we'll be talking about that next Wednesday too as well. Talking about some of his latest columns and more about what's happening at Bucks County, because it's I tell you, things keep on ramping up. There's also seems to be some interesting cracks happening in the kind of Joan Cullen school board over here in Penridge that we might be able to talk about next week. On Friday, as I said, I'll let people know the details of how we're going to work that out, timing and all that other kind of stuff on Friday. We're going to be trying some things a little bit differently on these next several weeks over Fridays, in part because Sean's schedule, as I said, has changed, and now he has a work conflict with our normal recording time. So we shall see, but I can promise you one thing, it's going to be cool, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm just hoping that we're going to get more, use this as an opportunity to bring in more voices to this podcast, more folks doing great work kind of around Bucks County and across the state, and have some fun while we do that. All right. Hey, everybody. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Hey, Chris. Okay, Chris, before I go then. So, I think you appreciate tonight's show, Chris. I mentioned this briefly. I was waiting to see if you jumped in. I think we'll maybe have to talk a little bit more about this maybe on Friday or something. But I started watching Foundation, as you heard me talking about on the show last Friday, and in our Discord, Chris was the one basically who clued me into that the show Foundation was based on Isaac Asimov's novel. I don't have no idea why I didn't make the connection right when I first saw it. I was like, what an idiot. But so he encouraged me, so oh yeah, definitely check it out. And so I did. I've been watching it, and I mentioned on the show last week that I'm not sure where I'm coming down on the show yet. Not that I don't like it, right? It's not it at all, but just trying to kind of think through like how I'm coming at it. And Chris was really it was great having a kind of little back and forth with Chris on Discord about what that's about. Actually, I have it up here, and one of the things that he writes is that let's see. So Foundation, where is this one part that I wanted to read? And I think that this is dead on right here. So Asimov wrote Foundation as a kind of take of the eternal reoccurrence and the rise and fall of empires, and fashioned it on Gibbon's history of the kind of rise and fall of the Roman Empire. I think that's right on the money, right? Right on the money. And it's really good. And I have to say, and I wrote back to Chris, the last episode I watched was kind of like a turning point for me a little bit in the series to kind of figure out what this kind of unsettled feeling I had was with the show. It wasn't really like good or bad. It was more like kind of like more located at the affective level of what was happening in the show. I think that's really what it came down to. And this past week, or this past episode that I watched, really kind of turned some of that for me. So hopefully we'll be doing some more of that kind of stuff on the Discord too, looking at some kind of shows we're watching, kind of back and forth on that, what we're reading and so on. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Chris, for that comment in Discord, and looking forward to hearing your comments about tonight's show too as well. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Amy, too, as well, for chiming in tonight. Great to hear from you all too as well. It's always a great start to the week for me when I get to spend it with some pretty much awesome folks as part of the Raging Chicken community. So thank you very much. So this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. I don't know why that just happened. That wasn't supposed to happen. This is what was supposed to happen. I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, and we will check you out. We'll be here on Friday. Look for us on our Discord or on social media to find more about Friday's show. Talk to you soon.
See ya!